The twinkling lights of Chicago's financial district flickered like distant stars, each window a reminder of the world James Reynolds once owned. He stood pressed against the glass of his modest 17th floor apartment, not the 52nd, where his corner office had once loomed high above the skyline, but high enough to still see what he'd lost. Towering monoliths of commerce cast long shadows over his faded existence, and one building in particular, the one that used to bear his name, seemed to glow colder than the rest, like a mocking specter. The whiskey in his glass was the last of his private collection, 30-year-old Macallan, worth more than the suit he wore. He swirled it slowly, letting the amber light dance across the room, across the stripped shelves and bare walls once covered in framed accolades. The echoes of boardroom cheers and victory speeches had long since faded, replaced now by the quiet hum of a fridge and the ticking of a clock that measured time. He no longer knew how to spend 6 weeks. That's how long it took to go from empire to ruin. 6 weeks since Victor Blackwood, his business partner, his best friend of 30 years, had executed the cleanest betrayal in financial history. Offshore transfers, falsified audits, asset liquidation masked as strategic repositioning. James had watched helplessly as the trap snapped shut, leaving him with nothing but his name. And even that felt foreign now, to empire builders. He muttered bitterly, raising the glass in a half-toast to the empty apartment before draining it. The burn offered comfort. Familiar, predictable. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, Mr. Reynolds. The stress is killing you. He laughed, but the sound was dry, humorless. Of course it is, he said aloud. What else is left to do the job? Slipping into his coat one that had once hung beside cashmere and was custom tailored in Milan, he stepped out into the evening. The sky spat sleet and rain, a cold, sloppy mess that soaked his collar and shoes within blocks. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to move. The street smelled of wet concrete and burned coffee. Crowds pushed past, umbrellas snapping, open like battle shields. And then he saw her, a child, no more than 8, crouched beneath the awning of a boarded-up bookstore. A piece of flattened cardboard was her only insulation from the wet sidewalk. In front of her, carefully arranged, were tiny paper animals, cranes, foxes, even a dragon. They were exquisite, precise, delicate folds sharper than any office inter could manage. He might have kept walking. He might have passed her by like every other umbrella-wielding shadow, but her eyes met his clear, unafraid, older than they should have been. Would you like to buy one, sir? She asked. Her voice was steady, matter of fact, no hint of pleading, just a transaction offered. He blinked. Did you make these? Yes, she said. The fox is my favorite, but the swan is hardest. He crouched beside her, water soaking into the knees of his slacks. She didn't flinch, just continued adjusting the display, her fingers fast. I practiced. What's your name? Sophia. A pause. What about your parents? She still. My grandmother's in the hospital. I'm managing things until she's better. He looked past her. A threadbare backpack sat tucked beside the wall. Everything she owned, likely. 2 men loitered across the street, eyeing the exchange. Something inside him, something dulled by years of detachment, stirred. How much for all of them? She blinked, surprised. $23. There are 23 today. He handed her 40 without hesitation. Keep the change. She hesitated, then gathered the figures swiftly, tucking them into a plastic bag with quiet reverence. You hungry? He asked. She paused, studied him, then nodded. Inside a nearby diner. She devoured a sandwich with the kind of grace, never messy, never rushed, but each bite purposeful. Like food was not something to be trusted. James watched in silence. When she reached for the napkin, he assumed she was going to wipe her mouth. Instead, she pulled a pen from her coat and began scribbling. Not doodles, not little hearts or cartoon. Cats, numbers, functions, symbols. She paused to calculate something in her head before continuing with fluid, practiced strokes. He leaned closer. What are you working on? She quickly moved her hand to cover the napkin. Just numbers. They help me think. James gently eased the edge of the paper toward him. The notation wasn't random. He recognized enough to know it wasn't just arithmetic. This was modular. Arithmetic, matrix notation, algorithmic shortcuts. Some of it he hadn't seen since his grad school days. Some of it he didn't understand at all. He looked at the girl across the table, her mouth smudged with jam and defiance, and suddenly, the man who had lost everything felt the unmistakable flicker of something impossible to measure. Hope. The rain had turned to snow by the time they stepped out of the diner, the neon glow of its sign casting pink shadows on the sidewalk. James walked slower now, not from fatigue, but from the gravity of what had just unfolded. A child and 8-year-old had written complex equations on a napkin between bites of a grilled cheese sandwich, numbers that would have sent his old investment analyst scrambling for textbooks, and she had done it as casually as someone humming a tune. Sophia walked beside him with that same quiet focus, her plastic bag of origami animals tucked under her arm like fragile artifacts. She didn't speak, she didn't fidget. She observed everything. Cars, lights, faces, the puddles on the street, and the reflections in them. "Where do you go when the weather gets bad?" James asked, not looking at her. She shrugged. "Places where cameras don't work. Hospital stairwells. Empty laundromats. Underneath buses if it's late enough." The words hit him like a slap. Not because she said them with bitterness, but because she didn't. There was no fear in her tone, no anger, just data, facts, input. James stopped walking. She took 2 more steps before realizing it, then turned. "You're coming with me," he said. She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes. Why? He couldn't answer at first. Because he didn't really know. Was it guilt? Loneliness? A desperate attempt to anchor himself to something real after months of watching everything unravel? Or was it what he'd just seen on that napkin, a glimpse of a mind that could change the world? "My place is heat," he said simply. Sophia didn't nod or smile. She just started walking again, this time in his direction. The apartment had never felt more barren than when she stepped into it. Sophia stood in the doorway, scanning everything, every corner, every shadow, every exit. James watched her eyes move like a laser, cataloging. "It's just the 2 of us," he said. "No one else lives here." She didn't relax, but she did enter. He showed her the office still cluttered with old reports, unopened letters, framed certificates that now meant nothing. He yanked the sheets off the pull-out couch, dragging it open with a grunt. "You can sleep here," he offered. "I'll get blankets." "I don't need many," she replied. "I don't move much in my sleep." James paused in the doorway and studied her. "Is that something you learned?" Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she began removing her shoes and arranging them neatly beside the couch. A ritual, a control mechanism. The first signs of what living in chaos had taught her. An hour later, she was asleep, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Her face, still smudged with city dirt, was peaceful in a way that made James ache. He stood in the doorway far longer than necessary, staring at this child who had somehow disrupted the gravitational pull of his collapsing life. Then he saw it, a piece of paper poking out from her unzipped backpack. He knew he shouldn't, but curiosity had always been stronger. Then caution. He reached down and gently pulled it free. It wasn't a drawing. It was a formula. A full-page theoretical breakdown of variable market behavior in recession-prone sectors, annotated, dated. The figures and notations were advanced college level. At minimum, and the conclusions made him sit down right there on the edge of the couch. She'd not just replicated financial theory, she'd improved it. He flipped to the back and found more. Algorithms, recursive loops, predictive models based on traffic patterns and stock movement overlays. The kinds of documents that, if submitted under the name of a seasoned hedge fund manager, would have landed a keynote speaking slot at any Wall Street convention. James's breath caught. His fingers trembled slightly, not from age or illness, but from something he hadn't felt in years, potential. He looked at the sleeping girl, at the bag of folded foxes, at the couch that seemed too small to contain the storm brewing beneath. Her small frame. This wasn't a rescue. This was a turning point. Not for her, for him. The next morning, he made a call he never thought he'd make again. "Rebecca, it's James Reynolds. I need a favor, a big one." The woman on the other end scoffed. "You finally deciding to donate to that literacy fund?" "I'm not calling as a donor," he said. "I'm calling as, I don't know what I am, but there's a girl. Her name's Sophia, and you need to meet her." There was a long pause. "Is this about guilt, James?" "No, it's about math, and the most extraordinary child I've ever met." "Fine," she said, "but if this turns out to be another publicity stunt, it won't be." He interrupted. "Trust me, this is real, to real." As he hung up, he turned to find Sophia standing in the hallway. She'd been listening. She said nothing, but her eyes were sharp. "I'm not a project," she said quietly. "I know," James replied. You're something else entirely. A pause. And I think the world is going to find out. She crossed her arms. That's not always a good thing. As she was right, because not far away, behind an armored office door and beneath a wall of monitors, Victor Blackwood leaned back in his leather chair, watching the footage from the charity gala where a child's voice had corrected his math. He didn't smile. He just spoke softly to the room. Find her? The snow had turned the streets to glass by the time Rebecca Harper arrived at James's apartment. Her boots left wet prints on the hardwood floor. Her clipboard clutched like a badge of authority and skepticism. She had always known James Reynolds as a man who once argued against food banks at city council meetings because they interrupted market efficiency. The man before her now looked like a ghost in borrowed clothes. And yet, when she met Sophia, the skepticism cracked. The girl sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting origami animals by geometric symmetry, not color, not shape, symmetry. She glanced up as Rebecca entered, but said nothing. She's not a case file, James said from the kitchen, pouring weak coffee into mismatched mugs. She's a person, and she's staying with me. Rebecca arched an eyebrow. Temporarily, permanently, if I can help it. Sophia's voice cut across the room. I'm not staying with anyone. I'm choosing to remain. Rebecca looked at her, blinked, then scribbled something on her clipboard. Where are your parents? Sophia. My grandmother is in a rehabilitation facility. Had a stroke 3 weeks ago. No living parents. No immediate kin willing to take custody. How have you been surviving? Sophia's gaze didn't waver. By applying observational probability models to foot traffic patterns and optimizing product placement and presentation to generate consistent, low-volume revenue. Excuse me, I sold origami, she clarified, on corners with high emotional traffic but low law enforcement density. James stifled a grin. Rebecca didn't. That sounds rehearsed, she muttered. It's not, Sophia said. It's math. 2 days later, they stood in a family courtroom, where polished mahogany walls reflected the absurdity of what was unfolding. A disgraced financier was petitioning for the guardianship the adoption of a homeless girl who had corrected a billionaire's algorithm at a gala dinner. Judge Michael squinted down over his glasses. Mr. Reynolds, you do realize how unorthodox this is? I do. You've suffered a very public collapse. You have no income, no standing, no assets. James didn't flinch. But I have a home, and I have purpose again. Sophia reached up and quietly took his hand. Judge Michael saw the gesture, and he saw the certainty in the girl's eyes that seemed to see far too much. I'll grant temporary guardianship, he said at last. Pending background checks and home inspection, James exhaled, not realizing until that moment how hard he had been holding his breath. Outside the courtroom, Sophia asked softly, Why did you do that? Because I know what it's like when the world walks by, James said. And because when I look at you, I see someone who already knows how to survive but deserves to learn how to live. For 3 weeks, they lived in a rhythm of quiet chaos. Sophia went to school and tested into 2 grades ahead. But within days, the phone rang. This is Mrs. Winters, said a clipped voice. Your daughter is, well, she's disruptive. Disruptive how? She keeps correcting the curriculum publicly. That night, James sat with Sophia at the dining table now cluttered with textbooks, scratch paper, and half-folded animals. You can't challenge teachers like that. Her fingers fidgeted with a paper fox in her lap. But she was wrong. I wasn't being rude. I was being accurate. James sighed. There's a time to be right, and there's a way to be heard. Sophia glanced up, her expression calculating. So, diplomacy, exactly. The next day she turned in a proof a better one than the teacher's, but attached a note that read, May I offer an alternate method for consideration? Even Mrs. Winters couldn't argue with that. It was a Thursday when the letter arrived. Not a digital message, a real envelope, thick, cream, no return address. Inside, an invitation. The Chicago Financial Foundation Annual Gala. In handwritten script below, James, it would mean a lot to see you there. Margaret. James turned the card over and over. Margaret Chen. She used to be on my board. Sophia looked up from a calculus workbook. Are we going? I don't know, maybe. I want to see what billionaires eat, she said. James raised an eyebrow. And also, she added quietly, I want to see what Victor Blackwood looks like when he's lying. The ballroom sparkled with old money and newer fear. James stepped through the entrance in his last tailored suit. Sophia walked beside him, a navy blue dress and braided hair making her look both impossibly young and disturbingly mature. The whisper started instantly. Is that Reynolds? He brought a child. That's the homeless girl, wasn't she, on the news after the gala? Margaret met them halfway across the room and hugged James tightly. Welcome back. Blackwood spotted them before dessert. Well, if it isn't the prodigal king, he sneered, raising a champagne flute, and the street mathematician. Sophia met his eyes. Your new algorithm has a critical flaw. He blinked. Excuse me? You've underestimated volatility by at least 40%. Probably more in a sustained bear market. Blackwood laughed loudly. You're joking, right? Walter Simmons, a hedge fund veteran nearby, leaned in. What's your method, young lady? Sophia took a napkin, borrowed a pen, and began to write. The table fell silent as Simmons leaned in. She's right. Blackwood paled. Sophia, unfazed, returned to her soup. As murmurs spread and Blackwood slipped away from the table, James whispered, you may have just painted a target on your back. Sophia looked at him. He's hiding something bad. I saw it in the data he flashed on the screen. There were shadows. Shadows? She nodded. He's not just using flawed math. He's covering something. I think he built the crash that ruined you. James sat frozen, her words echoing louder than the orchestra in the background. The girl, who once sold paper foxes on the corner, had just announced that the man who destroyed James Reynolds may not have just betrayed him, he may have engineered the entire collapse, and Sophia, she was the only one who could prove it. Would you like me to continue with part 4, Project Phoenix? This is where the real game begins. James sat in the dark, the glow of his laptop screen washing his face in cold light. The apartment around him had fallen into silence, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muted wind tapping the windows like fingers, trying to get in across the living room. Sophia slept, if you could call it that. Even in slumber, her fingers twitched against the bedspread as if solving problems in her dreams. But James couldn't sleep because everything she'd said was right. There had been something wrong with Victor Blackwood's presentation, a flicker of numbers too fast to analyze in real time, a variable buried in projections that only someone like Sophia would catch, the kind of clue that, when pulled, unraveled billion-dollar lies. He opened a folder on his desktop, one he hadn't dared revisit until now, labeled simply Collapse. Inside were transaction records, memos, and asset reports from the final weeks of Reynolds' financial. Reports he'd read over a dozen times during his fall, trying to find the fault line. But tonight, he looked at them differently. Because now, he was looking through her eyes. The next morning, James found Sophia standing in the kitchen in her oversized hoodie, hair disheveled, hands deep in a box of cereal. I need access to encrypted trading data, she said. Between bites, James blinked. You what? Reynolds Financial still has some public assets attached to the collapse files. Most are locked, but some weren't coded right when the servers were shut down. Whoever closed your books didn't know how to hide properly. I can trace the movement of the derivatives. James was still catching up. You've already started. She looked at him, almost insulted. Of course, that day, the dining table was cleared. Not for meals, but for war. Sophia laid out notebooks, graphs, strings of handwritten code. James pulled out his old spreadsheets, asset summaries, and private communications with fund managers. The dining room became a control center. And that's when James gave it a name, Project Phoenix. Sophia raised a brow. Rising from the ashes? No. James said, something that dies and comes back stronger. We're not rebuilding what I had. We're creating something new. She nodded once and got back to work. By week's end, James made another call, one he had dreaded. Sarah Lawson, said the voice on the line. If this is a pitch for an apology, I'm hanging up. It's not. It's a chance to fix what Blackwood broke. Silence. Then, go on. Sarah had been Reynolds Financial's lead systems architect until the day she resigned over Blackwood's aggressive restructuring. She never said what she'd seen, but she left with her dignity intact and refused Blackwood's offer to come aboard his new firm. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in James's apartment, STARING down at Sophia's algorithmic flowcharts. You expect me to believe a child reverse-engineered predictive fraud modeling from a dead company's server? Logs? James simply pointed. Ask her. Sophia didn't look up from her laptop. I didn't reverse engineer it. I bypassed it. The data logs Blackwood left behind still carry pattern ghosts. He embedded a kill switch cascade in Reynolds' risk engine, triggered a liquidity panic across all shallow margin accounts. He didn't just collapse the company. He timed it to profit immediately through third-party offshores. Sarah's jaw tightened. That's impossible. Check the numbers. 30 minutes later, she slammed the laptop shut. It's not impossible. It's insane. This wasn't sabotage. It was engineered demolition. Like financial arson, except the fire came with a bonus check. She stared at Sophia. You cracked. This? Alone. Sophia finally looked up. Not alone. Not anymore. Sarah looked to James. And for the first time since the collapse, he saw in her eyes something like trust. I'm in. That night, the apartment transformed. James's office became a locked war room. Whiteboards were filled with transfer diagrams. Sophia commandeered the router, running encrypted connections through a series of proxy tunnels. Sarah installed a secure server beneath the floorboard's military-grade encryption with air-gap failsafes. Each day, Sophia wrote code. Each night, she posted disguised equations to an online forum for gifted students testing her theories in plain sight, hiding her breakthroughs in the language of math only the rarest minds would understand. They tracked shell companies, reconstructed falsified reports, and began identifying exactly when and where the money moved after Reynolds' financial fell. Sophia built a predictive engine. Sarah combed through security protocols to spot Blackwood's digital fingerprints, and James reached out to the victims, former analysts, displaced employees, pensioners who lost everything. I know. It won't fix what happened, he said in each call, but I need your help to prove it wasn't just bad luck. It was betrayal. Most didn't believe him, but a few did. Then, one night quietly, without ceremony, Sophia's algorithm cracked a wall. James returned from the store to find her still at the dining table, eyes wide, lips parted slightly. I found it, she whispered. He dropped the grocery bag. What? I found a shadow link, she said, voice rising. He's hiding the money. Not in dozens of places, just a few, but layered with dummy accounts, nested loops, false positives, and there's a timer. His assets aren't just gone. They're coming back. James stepped closer, his pulse pounding. Coming back. In 18 months. That's when the final rollover completes. He'll reconsolidate everything under a new firm name, and no one will question it because by then all the regulators will have closed the books. James sank into a chair, staring at the glowing screen. Blackwood hadn't just robbed them. He had set a delayed resurrection, a phoenix of his own. Except this time, James and Sophia were watching. As the screen displayed the reconstructed transactions, James whispered, "What do we do now?" Sophia turned to him, eyes gleaming. "We expose him." He nodded slowly. "Then let's finish building the fire." The storm came at 3:17 a.m., not with thunder or lightning, but with the sound of splintering wood. James was on his feet before he was fully awake, heart hammering in his chest, instinct overriding sleep. He didn't need to check. He knew. They were here. Sophia had already rolled off the couch in the office and pulled the emergency pack from under her bed, her small face pale, but composed. She met his eyes, speaking the words they'd rehearsed. Code Phoenix. James nodded once. Go. They moved like clockwork down the hall, through the rear stairwell. The emergency exit door groaning open just as booted footsteps echoed behind them. The bitter Chicago wind sliced into James's lungs as they emerged into the back alley and vanished into the city. Across town, Sarah's car waited 3 blocks away, engine off. Eyes wide as they dove in. They found us, James panted, cradling his chest. How? Sarah asked. They knew exactly where to go, Sophia said, her voice flat, which means someone gave them a map. 12 hours earlier, everything had seemed under control. The algorithm was nearly complete. A prototype of the pattern detection engine now mapped fraudulent financial behavior in real time. Sarah had finished building the mobile secure server. Sophia had even finished an optional bonus proof for her university-level math class, impressing a professor who had once doubted her existence. They'd allowed themselves a rare moment of calm until Rebecca Harper showed up. "I need to speak to you," she said. Standing in the hallway of James's apartment, rain clinging to her coat, James frowned. "It's not our scheduled check-in. It's unofficial," she admitted. She entered nervously, glancing around the apartment with a strange precision. She asked innocuous questions. How was Sophia adjusting? Was the homeschooling legal? Were James's health records up to date? James answered cautiously. Sophia, sitting quietly at the kitchen counter, watched her the way a hawk watches a rabbit. She tilted her head. Something was off. James nodded toward the hallway. Sophia, can you grab the diagram from the study? As soon as she was out of earshot, Rebecca leaned in. Blackwood knows about her, she whispered. About the algorithm. He thinks she's dangerous. James's stomach sank. How? I made a mistake, Rebecca said, her eyes glossing over. Years ago, document errors, forged signatures. Blackwood found them, said if I didn't cooperate. You fed him information, only what I could observe. I never gave him direct files, I swear. But lately, he's been aggressive. He wants access, not just to the algorithm, to her. James clenched his fists. You need to leave. Now, she stepped back, her voice barely a breath. He's coming tonight, back in Sarah's safe house. The walls were closing and James sat on the edge of the bed, sweat pooling along his brow. Sophia stood across the room, packing and repacking her backpack as if preparing for battle. He wants me, she said, because I saw something he didn't want anyone to see. James looked up. We're moving again. New server, new base, well, triple encryption. No, Sophia said. We stop running. He blinked. What? We finish it. We go public right now. James stood. Sophia, we don't even know who else Blackwood has bought. The media, the SEC, the police, that we show them something they can't ignore. She snapped. Math doesn't lie. The room fell silent. She stepped forward and placed her hand over his. You told me once that people make justice happen, she said. So let's make it happen over the next 3 days. The safe house became a war zone of keyboards, screens, code, coffee cups. At Paranoia, James barely slept. Sarah ran comms out of a portable data vault. Sophia pushed the algorithm beyond anything they'd imagined. They built in redundancies, air-gap failovers, anonymous mirror servers across 7 countries. And then Sophia made one final addition, a failsafe that would release everything, all files, all names, all transactions to every major regulatory body on Earth if anything happened to her or James. It's not just to protect us, she said. It's to make sure they never try to hurt another kid like me. The next morning, James stepped outside the safe house for the first time in 2 days to get air. That's when he saw the man in the gray coat across the street, same man he'd seen 3 nights earlier near the old apartment. Now he was pretending to read a newspaper, but it was upside down. James turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind him. They're circling. He told Sarah. She nodded. Then, it's time. They prepared the first public leak, a partial release of the algorithm, stripped of identifiers, but laced with data clear enough to reveal patterns. Behind Reynolds' financials collapse, they sent it to 3 respected journalists all at once. Then, they waited for 2 hours. Nothing. Then the first journalist replied, I've never seen anything like this. Are these numbers real? Then another, can you confirm the identity of the author? This is no Bell-tier work. And then one line from the last. Tell the girl she just changed the world. That night, as Sophia finished her final security test, James brought in a single item from the hallway, a small glass box. Inside it, the first origami fox she'd ever sold him. He placed it beside her laptop. You folded a new future, he said. Sophia looked up, her voice quiet but full. A fire? No, she said. We burned the old one. Now we're writing a better one. Down the street, inside a black Escalade. Victor Blackwood stared at a tablet. On it, an article was beginning to go viral. Titled, The Math That Destroyed a Tycoon. How an anonymous prodigy exposed the biggest financial crime in a decade. He didn't speak. He just picked up the phone and said, end it. Chicago didn't sleep that night. The article hit just after midnight, quiet at first, like a match catching flame in the dark. But within hours, the story had leapt from obscure financial blog to trending headline. Anonymous prodigy outsmarts Wall Street giant. Digital trail ties Victor Blackwood to $9 billion fraud. Mystery algorithm exposes largest financial sabotage since Enron. The name James Reynolds trailed in every headline, but it was the mystery coder, the anonymous mind behind the algorithm, who captured the world's imagination, The fox, the journalists called her, referencing the small origami animal that had appeared in a photo from the charity gala. Some thought it was a team of coders, others suspected an underground whistleblower. No one guessed the truth. Not yet. In the secure basement of Sarah's consulting office, now the command center, Sophia watched the monitors like a war general. Her fingers tapped rhythmic equations on the armrest of her chair. It's time, she said. James nodded, still stunned by the reach of the story. Will it hold? He asked. Sophia turned to him. I built it to burn clean. They'll see what he did. They won't be able to unsee it, even if they try to silence it. They'd have to take down the entire internet, she said, and I have 15 auto-release servers programmed to post everything again if they do. James couldn't help but smile. You were 8 years old when I met you. Sophia didn't look away from the screen. I was never just 8. Elsewhere in the city, the fire reached Blackwood. Victor stood in a penthouse ringed with steel, his eyes dark as the lake beyond the glass. 6 monitors lined the wall, each showing the spread of the article across global media. Who released this? He hissed into his phone. We can't trace it. Multiple IPs, rerouted through offshore servers. And he turned slowly. And what? There's a predictive subroutine in the algorithm. It's already identified shadow firms you haven't even launched yet. Victor slammed the tablet down, the screen cracking like ice under both heels. They want war, he said. Then we give them one. He tapped a screen. Trigger Operation Ember. Back at the safe house, the attack came fast. First, the server logs blinked red. Massive data spikes. DDoS, Sarah confirmed. Massive one. That's just noise, Sophia said. Watch the back channel. A second red flag appeared. False warrant requests, James read aloud. Dozens falsified law enforcement subpoenas trying to get access to our backups. They're trying to make it look like a federal investigation, Sarah added. Sophia was already typing. Too slow. I've sandboxed every threat route. If they breach one layer, I rerouted through public school servers. James blinked. Why schools? She smirked. No one wants to explain to the media why they shut down 4th grade math tests in 30 states. The next wave was physical. And a marked van parked across the street. 2 men stepped out, one with a briefcase, the other scanning the building with something that looked like a wand from a science fiction movie. They're here, Sarah whispered. We need to go. No, Sophia said firmly. We in. It. She stood, unplugged her drive, and held it out. This is the complete dump. Every shell company, every transfer, every time Blackwood's money moved through a system meant to protect people. We deliver it. James stared at her. To who? To everyone. They enacted the final phase. Sarah loaded the data onto secure devices, 5 identical drives, each going to a different drop point. James walked into a federal building with one of them, straight into the office of Eleanor Harmon, Director of Financial Regulation and Enforcement. She looked up in stunned silence as the disgraced titan laid the drive on her desk. You'll want to plug this in. Is this a setup? It's justice, he said, and a second chance elsewhere. Journalists received the full data pack. Analysts confirmed it within hours. Universities who had doubted Sophia's forum posts began studying the algorithm and publishing papers. Former Reynolds financial employees, long silenced by shame and fear, came forward. And the final nail, an anonymous YouTube upload showing Sophia correcting Blackwood's algorithm filmed from across the gala table. Timestamped, undeniable. The world exploded. The FBI raided Blackwood Capital. Interpol froze Blackwood's international accounts. And Victor Blackwood? He was arrested trying to board a private jet under a false identity, carrying an encrypted drive with nearly $400 million in unrecovered assets. The aftermath was surreal. Regulators announced global implementation of Sophia's fraud detection protocol. She received a letter of invitation to meet despite being only 9. James was asked to testify before Congress, and Sophia? She declined the interviews, the TV spots, the offers to brand the genius girl. Instead, she sat in a classroom, yellow walls, whiteboards covered in her diagrams, sunlight streaming in from wide windows. The Reynolds Foundation for Mathematical Innovation had opened its doors, funded by recovered money, staffed by those who believed in second chances, built for the kids like her who had been invisible until someone looked. Months later, James and Sophia stood again at the street corner where they first met. It was spring now, warm, bright. The bookstore had reopened. The cardboard was gone. but beside them sat a small metal plaque embedded in the sidewalk. In this spot, a girl sold folded paper animals. She changed the world with her mind. And a man learned the most important fortune isn't money, but meaning. Sophia traced a finger over the fox emblem etched into the bronze. You know, she said, there are patterns in people too. James looked at her. What do you mean? They repeat. They make the same mistakes until someone shows them the formula to change. James took her hand. And you found it? No, she said, leaning her head on his arm. We did. The wind picked up, scattering a paper crane someone had left nearby. It soared for a moment, then settled gently. In the street. Not lost, not broken, just landing exactly where it was meant to be.